InSpanning Gateway, I'm Asia, and this is going to be a video on witchcraft, spells, and rituals. I got a 16-year-old. Okay, so this is going to be about witchcraft, spells, magic, rituals. We're going to get a broader perspective of these things. And another way of looking at that is we're going to InSpan. We're going to go within. We're going to look at the feminine, the yin, okay, the feminine principles, dealing with the spirit, the unseen, things of the dark. And this is another way of identifying a spell in magic is because just by the word dark, people are usually scared away from things of the occult or any type of ritualistic practices just based on the ideology that these things have to do with anything demonic. Because we have to be able to identify there is a light and dark within all of us. We have life experiences where we have been in a dark place. That's a spiritual location that has everything to do with your spirit when your spirit is in a dark place. When people operate off of dark natures, things that are of a lower state of being, um, and people who can operate through higher states of being, light and dark. It's just a representation of a spiritual location. Where the spirit resides. Okay, there's different states of being. We know that especially through the emotions that we go through, because that is a big representation of where we are spiritually based on our emotions, if we are in a light or a dark place. And these are things that we can use to identify within ourselves, and how we're able to see spiritual things and not have to look at them in a religious context or an indoctrinated context, because that's not the only ways of learning these things. And these things, dealing with the spirit, are usually passed down through the family, the lineage, right? But we have been purposefully cut off from these things in order for us not to be able to tap into our natural abilities, especially through knowledge. That's why so many things are covered up, and we are always seem to be digging, digging for something, because of so much that has been covered up. And it's a very much the time that we're in right now is a time of uncovering, time for highlighting things, being exposed, things of the dark. There's many things happening in the dark, and the dark has to do with the unseen, the things that we are not aware of, because there's things that we don't know and are not aware of in our everyday lives unless there has been some type of light information. Light represents information, a way of seeing, not just seeing with your physical eyes, but it's also representation of what you're doing spiritually, so much that we actually have sun to be able to see, and the actual physical representations of night and darks, because there's different characteristics of night and there's different characteristics of day. Night and day, my bad. Night and day, okay? That's magic. Just the movement, the manipulation of characteristics. There's many different ways of looking at magic in its natural essence before we start adding on stories and characteristic to what these things are, and being able to identify a multiplicity of existences of what witchcraft is, what spirit spells are, what rituals are in many different dimensions, just by a way of perceiving. And then we can see how these things play out in our everyday lives because we have life experience, and being able to identify that word with things that we have experienced, right? Because we all have experienced some form of manipulation. We all know that we are able to manipulate as beings. We know that when we are creating something or molding something or changing something, that is a form of manipulation just in its natural essence before it comes to any type of behavioral um, form, okay? Because that's all also a form, a behavioral form or a shape form. There's different type of forms, different ways that magic can be used, whether it's through the mind, emotions, or actual physical manipulation. Especially when it deals with the mind, the great way of manipulation is through imagery. That's why imagery is so important, the things that you pay attention to, because it's a way of manipulating to get you to see a certain thing, to see a certain way. And especially when you have been given repetitive, ritualistic, repetitive images, okay, ritualistic, um, then it's solidifying an image in your mind, and that's how you're going to be able to perceive things, unless you have an outside, a broader perspective of what things are. That's why it's so crazy how people tend to get a perception of, just for instance, black people based off of a characterization of what they see on TV. That's how these things get manipulated through programming and the repetitiveness. It's a ritual, okay? We have to see the natural essence of these things. A ritual, we all participate in many different rituals. Waking up and having your coffee is a ritual you do every morning to get some type of satisfaction, some type of manipulation, certain things that you do, certain practices, filling up your coffee cup, doing all that, waking up to an alarm, that's a ritual. Okay, there's certain things that we do, certain practices, certain elements. Okay, using the phone, using the alarm is using the practice of using elements of an alarm, notification and alert, um, in order for you to achieve a certain outcome of waking up at a certain time. That's a ritual. Going to church and drinking the blood of Jesus. Now, I think we should take a look at that ritual, because that's also a form of ritual. Going to church every Sunday is a form of ritual, to achieve whatever outcome you're trying to achieve. But I think it's important to know what that outcome is, because it's very much ritualistic practices, and it's amazing how it keeps people there for eons, when church is not the essence of being. That's not the essence of that's not the only form of having a relationship with God. That's just one type of relationship with God. Whoever you want to call God, or whatever you consider God, you better hope to know that for yourself. Okay, but that's just one slice of the pie. Because there's many different sects of religion as well, but it's not the only connection to creation, to life, to the universe, whatever word you want to describe that. Um, so and much of our society is based off of religious principles. This is very much a religious society, because it runs off of rituals, practices, programs, systems. Okay, the universal has its own systems, but man, through the manipulation of the mind. Okay, the mind is all about manipulation, because usually people think shit out before they play it out, how they're gonna move throughout the circumstance. Okay. So there's many forms of manipulation in magic and witchcraft, and people who know how to create and manipulate circumstances are able to use certain type of witchcraft. Now, we all have the ability to do so, and we all do it in our many different ways in life, because we all are have different makeup, okay, depending on our being. How we maneuver through life, if we are more in our angelic or demonic, because we all have the light and the dark within us, and how we choose to operate within our lives and our essence and our being. So we are able to participate in witchcraft, and once we understand what witchcraft is, which is, I thought it was interesting that witch and bitch are similar words, so we can start to understand the natures of a bitch without having to just associate a bitch with um, a female or a female dog. No, it's definitely a reason why these two words are very similar, witch and bitch, is because of what a bitch can do to is when it's dealing with the emotions. A witch is able to. That's why there's certain things called love spells and enchantments and charms. Okay, so it's a way of manipulating the emotions, And someone that was considered a witch in a negative connotation would be someone that negatively manipulated somebody's emotions, just in its natural essence. And I think that we could be able to see how this situation would play out in an everyday life situation, and how we could be attached to certain people that are able to manipulate emotions, and that can be in a positive thing or a negative thing, depending on the being, the spirit behind these things. So there's white, there's witchcraft, there's lighter witchcraft, and then there's dark, just depending on the spirit of the person who participates in these things, because there's many forms of dark and many forms of light. People who manipulate people to bring them out of a lower state of being. Okay, there's people that have a natural ability to lift people out of lower states of being. That would be more of a white witchcraft, a light witchcraft, bringing someone to a higher state of being than to manipulate someone into a lower state of being, or doing any type of ritualistic practices in order to get a certain outcome. We're supposed to be able to see by the fruit that the being bears, but depending on the level of magicianry, okay, witchcraft magicians, okay. This is also a good representation of different time cycles, because there are different periods of time where people practice witchcraft differently. That's how it was able to come to being, and now um, witchcraft has been covered up into a way of seeing that isn't necessarily a full representation of what all that witchcraft is, because it's not just this one thing. Okay, once we can understand it's a form of manipulation. All right. But there's people that, we live many lifetimes. It could have been a point where we were a magician or practiced some type of other things in different lifetimes, but in this point that we're in now, we have to see how these things have continued on through time. And a lot of us aren't able to identify the witchcraft that's going on because we only seeing it in certain ways. Okay, because we live in a witchcraft bubble. Everything is witchcraft. Everything is ritualistic. It definitely keeps people lost in their desires. If we think about just drug addicts and what drugs have done to people, that is mass spell work and witchcraft, in which it keeps people in a repetitive ritualistic state of being, where they're continuing on going in circles. That keeps people trapped, spiritually bound to certain things. When we have certain addictions, or we have certain characteristics or ways of being, it's the same thing as practicing rituals. um, it's a form of magic that we can do on ourselves or we can do on other people, but it's up to us to be able to recognize these natures, these spirits, these ways of being. But if we're not able to identify the spiritual aspect of what's going on, that's how we're able to get manipulated through witchery, okay? Through witchcraft. It's not just about, people making spells. That's definitely a part of what, people are doing out here, is doing fucking spells and shit. Um, and people not even understanding what they're even, getting a part in. This is something you want to know what the fuck you doing before you just start dibbling and dabbling in and stuff. That goes with anything in aspect of life. It doesn't have to just deal with spiritual things. You want to know what the fuck you getting yourself into before you do it, right? If somebody tell you to get in a car, you want to know the details. You want to know what's up. It's the same thing in the spirit. You want to know what you're getting yourself into, because a lot of people don't recognize that whatever you sending out, you also are responsible for that, and how that plays out in not only somebody else's life, how that affects somebody else's life, but how it's going to affect yours as well, because that energy comes from you, whatever you choose to send out. If you know the laws of the universe, which you very well should, you'd want to know before you start doing certain things and practicing certain things. And this also lets you know about things, give you an ability to look at the things that you have practiced that have people, that have yourself in a ritualistic state. If there's any place that you are and being stuck in a certain way, comfort is a good identification of that, because we get comfortable, and that can also be a spell.